This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
Look, staying healthy isn't easy. Watching your diet, hitting the gym, avoiding stress. But a good night's rest helps boost your overall health and wellness. And it couldn't be easier. The new Sleep Number 360 Smart Bed is the only bed that effortlessly adjusts and responds to both of you. The result? You wake up ready for anything. Proven quality sleep is life-changing sleep. Don't miss our 4th of July special. The new Queen Sleep Number 360 C2 Smart Bed is only $8.99. Plus free premium delivery when you add a base. Ends Monday. To learn more, go to sleepnumber.com.
BBC Radio Scotland.
This is a podcast from the BBC. I'm Nicola Meehan with my highlight from today's show. Now, first up this afternoon, we're hearing about a superb new series on Scotland's literary landscape and voices. It's currently running on BBC4. It's called Written in Scotland and it's presented by writer and broadcaster Kirsty Wark. It explores the ways in which the country's been reflected, shaped and defined by its writers, from Sir Walter Scott and Robert Burns to Jenny Fagan, Ian Rankin and Jackie Kay. Episode 1, Nationalism and Unionism, was broadcast last week, and Episode 2, Rural Scotland, went out yesterday. There are 2 more episodes still to come, and I am delighted that in between Newsnight rehearsals, Kirsty Wark will tell us more. Are you busy, Kirsty Wark?
Yes, it's a kind of slightly muggy day in London. I think I'd rather be with you.
Oh, well, listen, I'm actually in a little cupboard in Stirling, Kirsty, so neither of us are near Glasgow.
I'd still rather be there.
Room for 2. So listen, my goodness me, it's hard to encapsulate the ground that you cover in this series in terms of history, geography, landscape, politics. Give us an idea. Where do you begin?
Well, I think you begin with the nature of storytelling in Scotland and what it means to the country. And it's always been like that. In fact, it was a lot of women in the 17th and 18th century who were the ones that collected the stories. Yeah. And when it came to the books that then came out of that, particularly for people like Walter Scott, his books were very much founded on stories that women had told about history and about family. He does credit one woman, Anne Lagan, but actually they were really the unsung heroes of so much of early Scottish literature because it was oral literature, it was storytelling. And I mean, I just loved, and I love that Radio 4 leapt at the idea of doing this, and we've only got 4.5 hours. I'd love it to be a lot more, but I hope that we have given a flavour, and we're able to give a flavour of just how strong our literary tradition is in Scotland. And it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal now. We're going through a huge purple patch, but it's always been there. And in a way, we don't sing about it enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the fact that you reflect on and celebrate the women who have carried the words and the stories from so early on, Kirsty. You remark, of course, that what quite happened was it would be a man's name on the spine of these stories, but women were at the heart of it. And in terms of your contributors, that's absolutely reflected as well, isn't it? There are so many brilliant women's voices.
Well, there are so many brilliant women's voices. I mean, look, Jenny Fagan, Val McDermott, A.L. Kennedy, Jackie Kay, obviously. I mean, women that actually, it's in their soul to write literature, which is not necessarily, it's just very Scottish in its dimension, I think. There's a kind of, there's a darkness and light to it, which really goes straight back to Confessions of Justified Sin and obviously to Jekyll and Hyde. One of the things I find very sad in a way is that we do not celebrate Robert Louis Stevenson enough. We just don't. Jekyll and Hyde is a shorthand. Someone might never have read the book. But there's always a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde character. It's entered the lexicon without it actually being known by everybody that it came from a book written by Robert Louis Stevenson.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And there's so much of that in the series, isn't it? I mean, Scottish literature has had such a profound effect on us as a nation, on our identity,
Completely.
on the way we see ourselves. But it's not just that. It's had such a huge influence globally. One of the lovely stories early on that you touch on, Kirsty, which I think is great, is the fact that, really, England only sort of christened Shakespeare as their national bard because they didn't have one, and we had one in Scotland.
No. Yeah, we had one in Scotland. We've always had a national bard. But I think what the series throws up as well is this duality between, and post 1707, of course, you had the kind of the archetypal dual personality of Walter Scott, whose head was firmly in the idea of the Union, but was terrified, I think, that a lot of Scotland's stories would be lost, and wanted to build up this idea of what Scottish history was about. He was the first historical novelist, so his heart is very much in Scotland. And of course, we might think now that a lot of his writing is very over-detailed, and you can forget some characters, remember others. But what he was writing about, with the Reformation, the Covenanters, all this stuff, is where we get our national history from, in a sense.
Quite, yeah, exactly. So talk us through briefly each episode, touching on what you're saying there. So nationalism and unionism, that was the first episode.
Yeah, nationalism and unionism, and it's the way that we express ourselves. And I'm not talking about nationalism and unionism necessarily in a narrow political sense. It's about how we give sense to who we are. And I was very keen, in fact, I was absolutely adamant that we were going to include some of Donald Joe's extraordinary speech at the opening of the Scottish Parliament. I wonder, I might be wrong about this, but I don't remember another big speech, but you're opening a new parliament, the first in 1707, and you invoke Burns, you invoke Walter Scott, you invoke the language of the Mearns.
Yeah.
And again, these novels like Lanark, there's quotes from Lanark, from Alistair Gray, inscribed in the wall of the Scottish Parliament. I was on the committee that helped choose the architect, and we were very firm that art and culture should be embedded in that Parliament.
Yeah.
And so, even going back to Burns, it was never clear, unionism, nationalism. He had to jump on both feet because he eventually had to earn his living as an exciseman. He was working for the Crown. Yet he talks about a parcel of rogues in the nation, the men, the small clutch of men, some of them venal, some not, who signed the Act of Union. And on the other hand, then you came on to the idea that actually in the 19th century, a lot of Scots benefited massively from the Union and indeed, I'm afraid, the Empire.
Yeah. So,
we've always, had, in a way, it's a foot in both camps. And I think that we reflect a lot of that in our literature, but we very strongly retain this huge sense of storytelling, which I actually don't think, to a certain extent in Ireland and Wales in terms of oral tradition, but I think our storytelling tradition is incredibly strong in Scotland. And we're not afraid to tell these Scottish stories and hope that other people understand them. I mean, my goodness, Walter Scott was a bestseller around the world. Yeah. Robert Louis Stevenson, Henry James lauded him. All these other authors lauded him. Burns was known around the world. And now to modern day Scotland. I mean, we had this kind of really difficult period after the Reformation when we weren't even allowed to have theatre. So theatre had to catch up. But when it came to literature, even books that have been dismissed more recently, for example, Kailyard novels, the Kailyard novels were really written for people who had to be forced out of the rural communities into the cities, reflecting on what their rural life was like. But I want to reclaim the Kailyard because a lot of these novels were very dark. Yeah. Look at Sunset Song, look at the Scott Square trilogy. It was very dark. You could say that was a Kailyard trilogy.
Yeah.
But it wasn't about, your little Button Ben and Coorie Doon and all this sort of stuff. It was about the tough life that people had, the tough choices, the tough decisions, the tough attitudes of the ministers all around Scotland, the power they wielded, and all the stories are shot through with this kind of question of morality.
Yeah, and about skewering those expectations or stereotypes, as you say, whether it's the Kailyard novel or whether it's what we think of a city or of a language or politics.
Well,
it's
again, we come on
questions.
to language.
Yeah.
So we've got rural and we've got urban, we've got language. We are a country rich in language. We have, you might say, Standard English, perfectly rich. You've got Scots, you have got Doric, and of course you've got Gaelic. And one of the extraordinary things that I discovered, lots of Gaels probably know this, I discovered that there's a massive strain of erotic Gaelic storytelling in the 17th century. Some of it really dirty. And I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea. And some of it was written by women.
Yeah, it's stunning. I think it's one of them, maybe Alexander
MacDonald. Or told
MacDonald,
by women, I should say.
And one of he's described as
exactly.
the most innovative, the most dangerous and the rudest. I mean, what a sales point. It's wonderful. Well, listen, speaking of poetry, we've got a clip from episode 3 of the series now, so this is a sneak preview on what's to come. And in this section, Kirsty, you're talking to poet Jackie Kay, who just a few months ago, of course, finished her tenure as Macker, Scotland's national poet.
Jackie, if there was one poem that sort of encapsulated your role as Macker, what would it be?
I think it would be Welcome Wee One, because I read somewhere that the Scottish Government were going to be doing a box of essential things for newborn babies. And so I wrote to the government, as you do, and I said to them, would you consider a poem to be an essential thing? And to my huge surprise, they wrote back and said yes. And then I thought, bloody hell, I've got to write it now. So I remember being in this hotel room actually in Edinburgh and staying up through the night to write this poem over and over and over again. And although it's quite a simple wee poem, it took me ages just to get it right. And I get stopped all over with people with new wee babies where they say, can we have a picture of you and the baby? And people have framed them and they're up in their bedrooms, and it just seems really lovely. And a kind of sleek way of getting through to the next generation of people to give them their own wee poem. So yes, this is a welcome wee one. Oh, my darling wee one, at last you're here in the world, and with all your wisdom, your een bricht as the stars. You've filled this house with licht, your trusty wee hon, your globe o' a heed, my cherished yin, my heart's ain. Oh, my darling wee one, the hale world welcomes you. The moon glows, the hearth warms. Let your life hae luck, health, charm. You are my bonny, blessed bairn, my small, miraculous gift. I never kent love like this.
Oh, a gorgeous reading there by Jackie Kay of her poem Welcome Wee One. That's taken from the next episode of Written in Scotland, and presenter of the series, Kirsty Wark, is with me. Kirsty, my kids are teenagers now, but I was listening to that episode earlier and it just reminded me, it's so beautiful, isn't it? It's heartbreaking.
It is so beautiful, and what a great thing in this wonderful box that's got you're very much utilitarian things that you need for a baby, and then you come upon a poem at the bottom of the box and it's yours forever. And again, I think that places the idea of literature and poetry right at the heart of Scotland.
Yeah.
And what I think is so great about this, being able to discuss this kind of stuff, is that we are going through now with our writers a great period of really strong writing, really strong poetry. And the sense of place is incredibly strong, whether it's Glasgow or Edinburgh, wherever else. We are actually, we obviously, on the basis of having had Robert Louis Stevenson in Edinburgh, and to a certain degree Walter Scott, we've now got wonderful writers in Edinburgh, Val McDermid, Jenny Fagan, Ian Rankin, who comes into the series, and I always remember talking to Ian about this, this idea that he remembers years ago it was, crime fiction was being dismissed as just crime, but actually it's tartan noir, Denise as well, Denise Mann, it's wonderful literature, and it's telling dark stories about crime in Scotland, and they use the duality of place as well, the dark and the light in Edinburgh, the dark and the light in Glasgow. And then again, you've got this wonderful vein of writing about people reflecting on their youth, which is Andrew Hagan, particularly in Mayflies recently, and of course the Booker winner, Douglas Stewart and Shuggie Bain.
Yeah.
But Shuggie Bain has been translated into practically everything, Farsi, everything. How did they do that and still retain this huge, clear sense of what he was writing about in the Glasgow vernacular?
It's so true. It's so Glasgow. And I love, in fact, the fact that as well, it does draw lines and it traces stories and it echoes influences. So you've got Douglas Stewart talking about the influence of the great Janice Galloway. Jenny Fagan touches on her as well. And the trick is to keep breathing. And that's something, again, I love.
The Trick of to Keep Breathing is a seminal book.
Yeah.
The Trick of to Keep Breathing. I mean, Janice Galloway was very shy. Believe me, we asked her many, many times to take part. But in fact, she's there anyway. Yeah. Because so many Scottish writers have actually, basically Douglas Stewart said he would not have written Shuggie Bain had it not been for Janice Galloway. The trick is to keep breathing. And I think that would be the same. I think Jenny Fagan would say as well, and does, that the trajectory of her writing and how she managed it would have been very different without Janice Galloway at her shoulder.
Yeah. And I'm thinking back to that wonderful poem from Jackie Kay and the fact that at birth we're already getting the message that words and language are at the heart of our identity in Scotland.
Absolutely.
But I'm thinking as well the accessibility of it and the fact that it doesn't always need to be written down. It can be told, and it reminds me, Kirsty Wark, of Big Mary of the Songs. You have to tell us about her.
Big Mary of the Songs was from Skye, and Big Mary of the Songs, I think she was basically on rent strike. The rents were going up and she was being put out of her home. So Big Mary of the Songs started singing, not writing, she couldn't write, started writing political songs, which she took all over the country, and Big Mary of the Songs was like Lulu way back in the day. She was famous, and actually, again, some of the storytelling that she was doing ended up finding its way into other writers' work. Again, not necessarily credited, but Big Mary of the Songs knew her worth. So she knew that what she was singing about would have a big impact. And it did, because it's all word of mouth. People were singing, changing the words and so forth, which is very much what oral tradition does. So, I think what we've done is I hope we've raised the people that maybe not really discussed widely in this series. And Brian McCluskey was a terrific producer and he put his back into it, and I, obviously it's a passion of mine. So I think that what we've done is hopefully for a wide UK audience is just show how rich a literary tradition we have, and one that we should never lose. And of course one of my worries is that we lose, I'm always talking about libraries, we lose libraries at our peril. Free space, safe space for kids to go and read books when they can't necessarily buy them, the parents can't afford them. And libraries should be the last thing to go, and so sadly in some places they're the first, and I think we lose them at our peril in terms of our own future as writers and readers.
You're here, Kirsty Wark, and I think this series absolutely underscores how important it is that we don't lose sight of that. Lovely to chat to you, Kirsty. Thank you so much for coming on. Take care.
Okay, thanks so much.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Lovely Kirsty Wark there. Yes, episodes 1 and 2 of Kirsty Wark's series Written in Scotland are available on BBC Sounds, and you can catch the next episode, which is going out on Radio 4 next Thursday morning at 11:30. That was my highlight from today's show. I'm Nicola Meehan. Thanks for listening.